During the 1860s gold rush, dozens of eating houses were set up in Dunedin. Dining rooms, luncheon rooms, chop houses, oyster saloons, cafes. And in today's episode of Talking Pictures, we're going to look at some stories behind just a couple of them. Beginning with the cafe on the left of this photograph. In December 1862, German immigrant Peter Donneker called a meeting of the newly formed German Association at his cafe, which was known as the Excelsior. The purpose of the meeting was to propose that a gymnasium and a Liedertafel be established at the cafe. It's unclear if the German Association took Donneker up on his offer to conduct these activities in his cafe, but local Germans can be found meeting for singing and exercising at other venues in the city not long after. Donneker appears to have continued to operate a gymnasium from his cafe, advertising the formation of a gym club there in May 1863. By the time this photo was taken, which was probably early in 1864, Donneker's Excelsior Cafe had become John Carl's Dunedin Gymnasium. Donneker's cafe and gymnasium was on the northern side of the Princes Street cutting, near the Octagon. Meanwhile, down the lower end of Princes Street, at the intersection with Mant Street, was Hubert's Cafe and Club. Hubert's Cafe and Club was opened in the middle of 1862 by Ludovica Matilda Hubert, or perhaps that should be pronounced Hubert, as we later learn that her husband didn't speak perfect English, perhaps suggesting that English was not his native tongue. Matilda, or Madam Hubert, as she was often known, had married John Hubert in Melbourne in 1854 and had two children who by 1862 were aged 4 and 6. But the marriage was an unhappy one, and when John arrived to join Matilda after selling a business in Australia, the cafe becomes a war zone. Matilda supposedly informed John upon his arrival that she was done with him and wanted to separate. And in November 1862, a very public battle for ownership of the cafe began to be played out. John allegedly threatened Matilda with a knife and placed an advertisement in the papers saying that he had taken over running the cafe. Then a joint statement was published retracting the previous announcement that John had taken over the business. A few days later, there was apparently another flip-flop, and John advertised that the cafe was up for sale. Later in the month, John allegedly assaulted Matilda again, following an argument about her working behind the bar. He then published a statement that he had again taken over running the cafe. A third assault allegedly followed. Matilda placed a public notice in the newspaper saying John had taken the cafe from her, but she was taking him to court. Barbs flew left and right at the ensuing hearings for the case that was described by Matilda's lawyer as perhaps the most painful one ever brought into court. Matilda claimed 3 counts of assault. The defence countered by inferring that John had been provoked by Matilda's desire to end the marriage, by her cavorting with another man following a visit to the theatre, a story corroborated by her own father, and by her refusal to abide by her husband's demands. Only one of the assault charges stuck, and the penalty was light. John then sold the cafe to Matilda's uncle, James Fisher, and disappeared, leaving Matilda to claim that her husband, John Hubert, her uncle, James Fisher, and her father, John May, had all been in cahoots and conspiring against her all along. When Matilda questioned how the cafe's liquor licence could be transferred to her uncle by her husband when it was in her name, she discovered that, as a married woman, her husband had all legal rights and she had none. She resorted to running a hotel on McLagan Street until around August 1863. With James Fisher having gone broke, she was able to buy the cafe back. She set about refitting and redecorating the premises, and it appears to have become more of a hotel until early in 1864, when J. Malossi and Co. attempted to reopen the cafe and luncheon rooms. Later that same year, Hubert's Cafe and Club was sold, and the sorry saga of Matilda Hubert and her Dunedin eatery was over. Just a stone's throw away from Hubert's Cafe, next to the post office in Jetty Street, but just out of shot in this picture, was another cafe, the Café de Paris. This cafe was established by the Reardon brothers, former operators of the Parisian Hotel in Melbourne, and it opened in April 1862. The Café de Paris boasted a 200-seat dining hall, and its kitchen was fitted out with a steam cooking apparatus and patent grill imported from Paris. In August 1863, the brothers announced that they had opened a second eatery in Princes Street called the City Buffet. In February 1864, they purchased 2 monster turtles imported from Fiji and put them on display, one in the Café de Paris and one in the City Buffet. On Easter Monday in 1864, they gave away an 800-weight cake containing 20 gold rings at the Café de Paris. In December 1864, the Café de Paris, the City Buffet, and the numerous other properties the brothers owned were put up for sale as they prepared to return to Europe. But chaos began to rain down upon the brothers in 1865. In January, 2 boarding houses and an empty building in Hope Street, which the brothers owned, were lost in a fire. In April, John Reardon was arrested and charged with having attempted to burn down other buildings, some of which they owned, in order to commit insurance fraud. The Reardon brothers' partnership was dissolved, and the Café de Paris and the City Buffet were again put up for sale. Michael Reardon later opened a new City Buffet and Café on his own account. On the 6th of September 1865, John Reardon was found guilty of 3 counts of setting fire to buildings and was sentenced to 6 years in prison, where I'm sure the food on offer was a far cry from what he was familiar with at his famed dining establishments. So it would seem Dunedin's bars and eateries of the Goldrush era were a hotbed of colourful characters, providing us with great fodder for this episode of Talking Pictures, and perhaps for future episodes as well. Thanks for watching.